A young American woman found a letter forgotten 50 years ago in Juliet's house in Verona. When she decided to respond to that yellowed letter, she never imagined it would change not just one, but 4 lives forever. Secrets from the past came to light. A lost love was rediscovered, and wounded hearts learned to love again in ways no one could have predicted. A story of second chances, courage, and true love that spans generations. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart, showing you that it's never too late to be brave, and that sometimes the best adventures begin when we have the courage to help a stranger. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. The Italian morning sun painted Verona's ancient stones with golden hues, creating a magical atmosphere that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Gracie Foster walked alone through the narrow streets, her footsteps echoing softly against the uneven pavement. At 26, she carried in her eyes the curiosity of someone who still believed the world held secrets waiting to be discovered. She was supposed to be exploring the city with Samuel, her fiancé, but he had chosen to spend the morning visiting local cheese and wine suppliers. "I need to make connections for the restaurant," he had said the night before, with that familiar, matter-of-fact tone. The anticipated honeymoon she had envisioned had turned into a business trip in disguise. Gracie stopped before an ornate gate, where dozens of golden padlocks gleamed in the sunlight. Above, a sign read, "Giulietta's house." Her heart raced. Juliet's house. The place where, according to legend, Shakespeare's heroine had lived her impossible love. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and entered the inner courtyard. What he saw took her breath away. The ancient brick walls were completely covered with scraps of paper of every color and size. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of letters were glued, nailed, or simply tucked between the stones. Women of varying ages milled about, some writing furiously, others simply gazing at the famous balcony where Juliet had supposedly heard Romeo's love letter. "It's impressive, isn't it?" A soft voice in Italian accented English made her turn. A gray-haired woman wearing a light blue apron smiled at her. "I'm Sophia, one of Juliet's secretaries. Are you familiar with our tradition?" Gracie shook her head, fascinated. For decades, women from all over the world have come here to leave letters to Juliet, asking for advice on love. We volunteers collect these letters and try to respond to them all. We believe that true love deserves a chance, always. Gracie's eyes lit up. As a fact-checker for a magazine in New York, she was used to investigating stories, but she had never imagined finding something so romantic and touching. "Can I help you?" he asked impulsively. Sophia smiled wider. "Of course. Come with me." He led her to a wooden table where other women were sorting letters by language. Sophia picked up a dusty box from the floor. "These are the oldest ones we've found recently, hidden behind a loose stone in the wall. Some are over 50 years old." Gracie delicately picked up a yellowed envelope. The blue ink had faded, but it was still red. "To Juliet, with love and despair. Isabel Fletcher, London, 1957. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter. The elegant handwriting told a story that made her hold her breath. "Dear Juliet, I'm writing to you from Verona, where I should have been the happiest woman in the world, but I've become the most cowardly. I met Francesco Moretti 3 months ago when I came to work as a translator at his family winery. He's everything I've ever dreamed of. Kind, passionate, with eyes that hold all the poetry of Tuscany. Francesco asked me to run away together, to start a new life away from the expectations of our families. He has plans, dreams, and he loves me in a way I never thought possible. But I'm afraid, Giulietta, afraid of disappointing my family in London, afraid that I'm not strong enough for this new life, afraid that this love is too intense to last. Tomorrow I'm going home, leaving my heart here in Verona. Francesco doesn't know it yet. I'm a coward, but I hope one day he can forgive me. If there is any magic in this place, please give me the courage to go back and fight for our love. With lost hope, Isabel Fletcher." Gracie felt tears burn her eyes. The woman's pain cut through time like a sharp blade. She looked at Sophia, who watched her reaction with interest. "It's one of the most touching letters we've ever come across," Sophia said softly. "Imagine, over 50 years. This Elizabeth must be over 70 now if she's still alive. And Francesco? Gracie asked, still holding the letter as if it were a fragile treasure. Who knows? Italy is full of Francesco Morettis. Sophia shrugged. But true love? Oh, that's the only one. Gracie looked back at the letter, then up at the famous balcony above them. An idea was beginning to form in her mind, bold and probably foolhardy. But something in Isabel's desperate tone, in the tragic beauty of that interrupted story, touched a part of her heart she hadn't even known existed. Sophia, he said slowly, do you still send replies to addresses that old? They rarely work, but we always try. Why? Gracie folded the letter carefully. Because Isabel asked for courage. And maybe, after all these years, it's not too late to give it to her. The midday sun bathed the courtyard when Gracie finally left Juliet's house, carrying with her Isabel's letter and a strange feeling that her life was about to change completely. She had no idea that within days this intuition would prove prophetic in ways she could never have imagined. Gracie's laptop glowed in the dim light of the hotel room, its keys clicking softly as she typed the most important response she'd ever written. Beside the bed, Samuel slept soundly, exhausted after a full day of browsing local markets and tasting wines with potential suppliers. She had spent the entire afternoon researching, using her journalism skills to try to track down Isabel Fletcher. After countless searches, she had finally found a clue. An Isabel Fletcher, born in 1936, who lived in a village in the English countryside. The data matched. The age, the origins. It had to be her. He took a deep breath and reread his letter once more. Dear Isabel, my name is Gracie Foster, and I'm writing from Verona, the very place you left your letter 53 years ago. I'm one of Juliet's secretaries, and your story touched my heart in a way I can't explain. You wrote about fear, about letting love slip away out of insecurity. I want you to know that your letter was found, that your pain has not been forgotten by time, and I want to say something you might need to hear. It's never too late to be brave. Francesco Moretti, what a beautiful name. What a beautiful story you two must have had. I don't know where he is now, but I know that true love leaves marks that time cannot erase. If there's even a chance, however small, of you two meeting again, it's worth a try. Verona remains magical. The stones still hold whispers of love, and Juliet's balcony still inspires passionate hearts. If you want to return, if you still feel there's something unfinished here, I'd love to help you find the answers you seek. Sometimes life gives us second chances when we least expect them. Maybe this letter is one of them. With love and hope, Gracie Foster, Juliet's secretaries, Verona. P.S. My hotel address is attached in case you want to reply. She sent the letter by express mail the next morning, her heart pounding. It was madness, she knew. What were the chances that a woman in her 70s, after half a century, would decide to revisit the past because of a letter from a stranger? The following days passed in a strange routine. Samuel remained obsessed with his professional contacts, dragging her to dinners with olive oil producers and visits to traditional restaurants where he took incessant notes in a small black notebook. Gracie accompanied him, but her thoughts were always on Isabel and Francesco, imagining what their last meeting would have been like, what words they would have exchanged, what promises they would have broken. You're acting strange, Samuel said on the third night as they dined at a restaurant overlooking the Verona arena. Distant. Ever since we started this trip, it seems like your mind has been elsewhere. Gracie looked at him over her glass of Chianti. Samuel was handsome, ambitious, intelligent, everything any woman could want. So why did she feel so empty around him? I'm thinking about stories. He half lied. Maybe I'll write something about our trip. Since when do you write? You're a fact-checker, Gracie. Leave the stories to those who know how to tell them. He cut a piece of osso buco without even looking up. By the way, I met a truffle importer today. It'll be essential for the restaurant's fall menu. She nodded mechanically, but inside something revolted against his condescending tone, against the ease with which he belittled her dreams. When they had first started dating 2 years ago, Samuel had encouraged her to write. Now completely consumed by his culinary ambitions, he seemed to have forgotten that she had dreams too. What if I really wanted to write? He asked, testing the waters. Gracie, be realistic. You have a stable job, we're getting married, I'm opening the restaurant. This isn't the time for fantasies, it's time to be practical. The word fantasies echoed in his mind like a slap. All his aspirations reduced to this: fantasies. It was that night when they returned to the hotel that they found the envelope under the door. Gracie's heart sank when she saw her name written in shaky but still elegant handwriting. "What's up?" Samuel asked, already heading to the bathroom. "Work," he said quickly, hiding the letter. She waited for him to fall asleep before opening it. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the paper. "Dear Gracie, I can't believe someone found my letter after all these years. I cried reading your words because for the first time in decades someone made me feel that maybe my love for Francesco wasn't just a youthful folly. You're right. It's never too late to be brave. I'm 73, Gracie, and I've spent my whole life wondering what if? What if I'd stayed? What if I'd fought? What if Francesco still thought of me the way I always thought of him? I've decided to accept his offer. I'll be arriving in Verona next Wednesday, along with my grandson Henry. He doesn't approve of this trip. He thinks I'm an old romantic living on illusions. Maybe he's right, but I need to know. If you could meet me at Juliet's house on Wednesday at 2 p.m., I would be very grateful. With renewed hope, Isabel Fletcher." Gracie read the letter 3 times before the words truly registered in her mind. Isabel was coming. Really coming. In 4 days, she would be face to face with the woman whose love story had touched her heart so deeply. She glanced at Samuel, who was snoring lightly, completely oblivious to the revolution happening beside him. Suddenly, the romantic trip he'd ignored took on a whole new purpose. She was going to help Isabel find Francesco, no matter what. He had no idea that this decision would change not only the course of the trip, but the course of his own life forever. Wednesday arrived with a crystal blue sky and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers and freshly brewed coffee through the streets of Verona. Gracie arrived at Juliet's house at 1:45 p.m., nervous as a teenager before a first date. She had chosen a simple, light blue dress and tied her brown hair back in a low ponytail. "I wanted to appear respectable, trustworthy." He waited in the courtyard, watching tourists take photos on the famous balcony and women write their love letters. His heart raced with each female figure that entered the gate. How would he recognize Isabel? The only clue he had was her age, 73. At 2 o'clock sharp, an elegant woman entered the courtyard. Her gray hair was perfectly combed. She wore delicate glasses, and she stood erect despite her age. She wore a white silk blouse and a knee-length skirt, and carried a vintage handbag that looked decades old. Beside her was a tall man in his 30s with dark hair and an expression that mixed impatience and concern. "Isabel?" Gracie approached hesitantly. The older woman smiled and her blue-gray eyes sparkled. "Gracie? My darling girl." The embrace they exchanged was warm, as if they were longtime friends reuniting after years apart. Gracie felt an unexpected emotion as she touched this woman who had carried a secret love for more than 5 decades. "This is my grandson, Henry," Isabel said, pulling the man aside. "Henry, this is the angel who found my letter." Henry extended his hand politely, but Gracie noticed the coolness in his green eyes. "Nice to meet you, Miss Foster. Please call me Gracie." She tried a friendly smile, but he didn't return it. "Grandma, maybe we should talk a little before," Henry began, but Isabel interrupted him with a gentle but firm gesture. "Henry, honey, we've come this far. I'm not giving up now." She turned to Gracie. "Can you show us where you found my letter?" Gracie led them to the wall where Sophia had discovered the box of old letters. Isabel approached the stones, gently running her fingers over them, and for a moment, her eyes filled with tears. "This is where I wrote," he murmured. "On this very wall. I remember every word, every tear that fell onto the paper." "Grandma," Henry said softly, approaching her. "You don't understand, Henry." Isabel turned to him. "You've never truly fallen in love. You've never felt your soul connected to another person in a way that defied all logic. And then, what happened after you left?" Gracie asked gently. Isabel sighed, looking up at the famous balcony above them. "I returned to London. I married your grandfather 2 years later. He was a good man, Gracie, and we had a decent life. But I never forgot Francesco. All these years I wondered if he'd waited for me, if he'd forgiven me, if he still thought of me. And now you want to find him," Henry said. unable to hide the irritation in his voice. "Yes, Henry. I want to find him. And if he's dead, I want to at least know I tried. I want to say a proper goodbye to the love I never had the courage to experience." Gracie felt a lump in her throat. Isabel's determination, mixed with the vulnerability in her voice, was heartbreaking. "I have a few ideas of where to start," he said. "Francesco Moretti isn't a very common name, and if he really did have a family winery—" "This is ridiculous," Henry suddenly exploded. "You two are living in a fantasy world. It's been 50 years. 50. This man is probably dead or married or doesn't even remember my grandmother's existence anymore. And you want to drag a 73-year-old woman around Tuscany in search of a ghost?" "Henry," Isabel said firmly. "Enough. No, Grandma, someone needs to be the voice of reason here." He turned to Gracie, his green eyes flashing with anger. "And you, Miss Foster, should take more responsibility. My grandmother is an elderly woman with a fragile heart. Playing with her hopes like this is cruel." Gracie felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not joking. I'm trying to help a woman find closure to a story that has scarred her entire life." "Closure?" Henry laughed sarcastically. "What a convenient word. And when we find out that Francesco Moretti died 20 years ago, or that he never really cared about her, who will deal with my grandmother's heartbreak? You?" "I will," Gracie replied firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "If it's necessary, yes, I will." Henry stared at her for a moment as if assessing her sincerity. Then he shook his head in frustration. Okay, but I'm coming along. Someone needs to protect my grandmother from you two and your romantic fantasies." Isabel smiled for the first time since Henry had begun his outburst. "Then it's decided. Let's go find Francesco." She looked around the courtyard, then at the porch, and finally at Gracie. "Where do we start?" Gracie took a deep breath. She was getting into something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. But she couldn't back out now. Not when she could see the hope shining in Isabel's eyes, even with Henry's resistance. "First," he said, "we need to find out how many Francesco Morettis there are in the Tuscany region. And then we'll visit them one by one until we find the right man." Henry sighed heavily but didn't protest. Isabel took Gracie's hand and squeezed it gratefully. And there, in the courtyard of Juliet's house, where thousands of love stories had begun and ended, a new journey was about to begin. A journey that would not only test the endurance of a half-century-old love, but would also reveal truths that none of the three were prepared to face. Verona's small municipal library smelled of antique paper and varnished wood. Gracie, Isabel, and Henry sat at a round table in the quietest corner, surrounded by telephone directories, maps of Tuscany, and printed pages from genealogy websites. "I found 17 Francesco Morettis in the area," Gracie announced, looking up from her laptop screen. "But not all of them are the right age. Eliminating the very young and the very old, we're left with 8 possibilities." Isabel leaned over the list, her glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she saw the names. "How do we know which one is right?" he asked, his voice thick with anxiety he tried to hide. "Well," Gracie consulted her notes, "you said he had a family winery. That gives us an important clue. You also said he was a few years older than you, which means he would be between 75 and 80 years old today." Henry, who had remained silent until then, leafing through a map with a skeptical expression, looked up. "And what happens when we discover that none of these 8 men is the Francesco you're looking for, Grandma? Or worse, when we discover that he doesn't want to see you?" Isabel straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, Gracie glimpsed the determined young woman she had been decades ago. "Then at least I'll know I tried, Henry. And that's more than I've done in the last 50 years. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Gracie realized the tension between grandmother and grandson ran deeper than she had imagined. Henry wasn't just being protective. There was something personal in his resistance to the journey. "Why are you so against this?" he asked gently. Henry stared at her with those intense green eyes. "Because I've seen what love does to people, Miss Foster. I've seen my parents destroy themselves in the name of true love. I've seen my grandmother spend decades pining over a ghost from the past. Love isn't a magical force that solves all problems. It's a dangerous illusion that prevents people from living their real lives." Isabel reached out and touched her grandson's arm tenderly. "Oh, Henry, your heart has been so bitter. My heart has become realistic. he replied, but his voice softened as he spoke to her. Gracie watched them fascinated. The dynamic between them reminded her of her own relationship with Samuel. He always trying to protect her from her fantasies, she always feeling like she needed to justify her dreams. "Okay," he said, returning to the list to break the tension. "How about we start with the Francesco Morettis who are still involved in winemaking? I found 3. One in Montalcino, one in Montepulciano, and one in San Gimignano." Isabel leaned over the map, tracing the routes with her finger. "Montalcino. I remember Francesco mentioned Montalcino. He said his uncle had vineyards there." Gracie's heart raced. "Then we'll start there." "Hold on," Henry interrupted. "Are you planning to just show up at these men's doorsteps and ask them if they remember an Englishwoman they met in 1957? "Sort of," Gracie admitted. Henry shook his head in disbelief. "That's insane." "Maybe." Isabel smiled for the first time since they'd arrived at the library. "But sometimes insanity is exactly what we need to break through years of excessive caution." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing their itinerary. Montalcino was a 2-hour drive from Verona. They could leave the next morning, visit the first Francesco Moretti, and if not, continue on to Montepulciano the following day. "Where are you guys staying?" Gracie asked as they left the library. "Hotel Villa Francesca," Isabel replied. "And you?" "Hotel Giulietta and Romeo with my fiancé." The words came out automatically, but for the first time in days, she remembered Samuel. In the last few hours, she had been so absorbed in Isabel's story that she had almost forgotten her own life. "Fiancé?" Isabel arched an eyebrow. "You didn't mention that before." "We're here on an early honeymoon," Gracie explained, feeling strangely uncomfortable. "Well, it was supposed to be. Actually, he's been spending most of his time working." Henry and Isabel exchanged a look she couldn't interpret. "Does he know about our expedition?" Henry asked. Gracie hesitated. Samuel knew nothing about Isabel, about the letters, about her plans to tour Tuscany. How could she explain that she was about to embark on a romantic journey with 2 people she had only met a few days ago? "I'll talk to him tonight," he said finally. But when she arrived at the hotel, Samuel wasn't there. He'd left a note saying he was having dinner with an olive oil producer and would be back late. Gracie was left alone in the room, staring out the window at the lights of Verona, thinking about the conversation she would have with him. How could she explain that Isabel's story had touched something deep in her heart? How could she talk about the sense of purpose she had found in helping a woman rediscover her true love? How could she admit that, for the first time in months, she felt truly alive? Most importantly, how could she explain all this when she herself couldn't fully understand what was happening to her? He picked up his phone and typed a message. "Samuel, I'm going to spend the next few days helping some friends. I'll explain when you get back. Love you." He sent it before he could change his mind. Tomorrow, he would deal with the consequences. Today, he just wanted to focus on the magical possibility that a 50-year-old love could be rekindled among the Tuscan hills. And if deep down in his heart he felt like he was running away from his own problems, well, that was a thought for another day. The rental car, a pale blue Fiat that Henry drove with almost military precision, wound through the Tuscan roads under a generous summer sun. Gracie sat in the passenger seat, constantly consulting the map and GPS, while Isabel sat in the back seat with effortless elegance, watching the landscape gradually change as they drove away from Verona. "Are you nervous?" Gracie asked, turning to Isabel when they had been on the road for an hour. Isabel adjusted her glasses and smiled, but Gracie noticed her hands were shaking slightly. 53 years, darling. 53 years imagining this moment. How could I not be nervous? Henry muttered something inaudible but kept his eyes fixed on the road. He had become even quieter since they'd left, and Gracie was beginning to wonder if he would actually show up, or if he would disappear at the first opportunity. "What if he doesn't remember me?" Isabel continued, voicing the fears that haunted her. "What if I was just a summer crush to him? What if he remembers perfectly and is still in love with you?" Gracie interrupted softly. "What if these were the longest 50 years of his life too?" Henry snorted. "What if he's married with children and grandchildren, living a full and happy life that you're about to complicate with fantasies of the past?" "Henry," Isabel said with a firmness that surprised even Gracie. "Enough. If you don't want to be here, I can have you drop us off in the next town and hire a taxi." The silence that followed was tense. Gracie saw the muscles in Henry's jaw tighten, but he didn't respond. He simply accelerated slightly, making the Tuscan hills pass by faster than before. They arrived in Montalcino shortly after noon. The medieval town stood majestically atop a hill, its ancient walls surrounded by vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. The scent of ripe grapes and fertile soil hung in the air. "It's beautiful," Isabel murmured, getting out of the car in the central square. "More beautiful than I imagined." Gracie looked up the address in her notebook. The Moretti Winery is about 2 miles from here on the Strada del Brunello. They ate lunch in silence at a small restaurant overlooking the valley. Isabel barely touched her food and Henry kept his expression closed, responding only in monosyllables when directly questioned. Gracie felt like a mediator in a tense diplomatic negotiation. The Moretti Winery was smaller than they had imagined. A rustic stone building surrounded by orderly rows of grapevines. A weathered wooden sign read, "Familia Moretti, Dal 1923. Isabel stopped before the iron gate, her hands gripping the strap of her vintage bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Maybe we should have called sooner," he muttered. "No," Gracie said firmly. "Some things need to be done in person." Henry remained beside the car, clearly reluctant to approach. "There's still time to back out," he said. Isabel turned to him, and for the first time, Gracie saw a flash of irritation in the older woman's kind eyes. "Henry William Fletcher," she said, using his full name with an authority that brooked no dispute. "You can stand there feeling sorry for yourself, or you can come support me. But I will not tolerate any more pessimism." Surprised by his grandmother's firmness, Henry reluctantly approached. They walked along a gravel path toward the main house. A middle-aged man was pruning a rose bush beside the porch. He looked up when he saw them approaching. "Buongiorno," he said with a friendly smile. "Can I help you?" "We are looking for Francesco Moretti," Gracie said in her basic Italian. The man waved. "I'm Francesco Moretti. How can I help you?" Gracie's heart raced, but one look at Isabel was enough to tell her something was wrong. The older woman was looking at Francesco with an expression of confusion and disappointment. "Sorry," Isabel said in English, "but the Francesco I'm looking for would be, well, he would be about my age." Francesco smiled understandingly. "Ah, you're looking for my father, Francesco Moretti Sr. He's in the vineyards out back. Do you know him?" Isabel exchanged a hopeful look with Gracie. "Maybe. Could we talk to him?" "Okay, follow me." They walked between the rows of grapes, the afternoon sun creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. In the distance, Gracie could see an older man hunched over the plants, his hands moving with decades of experience. "Papa," Francesco Jr. called, "there are some people here who would like to speak with you." The man straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth he carried at his belt. As he turned, Gracie heard Isabel inhale sharply. He was a tall man with pure white hair, sun-tanned skin, and eyes that, even wrinkled with age, still shone with life. But when he looked at Isabel, there was no recognition, only polite courtesy. "Buongiorno," he said, taking off a battered straw hat. "How can I help you?" Isabel took a step closer, and Gracie could see that she was trembling. "Francesco," he said softly. "My name is Isabel. Isabel Fletcher. I worked at your winery in the summer of 1957. Francesco frowned, clearly trying to remember. Then he shook his head with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Signora, but I don't remember. It was many years, many people. And in 1957 I was in the army serving in Rome. I didn't come home until 1959. Gracie felt Isabel's disappointment like a physical blow. Henry immediately approached his grandmother, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," Isabel said politely. "Sorry to bother you." They walked back to the car in silence. Isabel maintained her composure, but Gracie could see the tears she was fighting back. "Grandma," Henry said softly as they reached the car. "Maybe we should—" "No," Isabel said firmly. "That was just the first one. We still have other names on the list." Henry looked at Gracie over his grandmother's head, and for the first time, she saw something beyond skepticism in his eyes. There was genuine concern there, and perhaps even a hint of admiration for Isabel's unwavering determination. "Montepulciano is only an hour away," Gracie said. We can try there today or wait until tomorrow if you'd rather rest. Today, Isabel said without hesitation. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. As Henry drove toward Montepulciano, Gracie glanced out the side window and saw Isabel discreetly wiping away a tear. The first Francesco wasn't the right man, but there was something in her determination that touched Gracie's heart in a new way. Maybe Henry was right about her romantic illusions. Maybe she was being naive and getting Isabel's hopes up. But watching the 73-year-old woman refuse to give up after her first disappointment, Gracie felt she was learning something important about courage, about not taking no for an answer when it comes to matters of the heart. And maybe, just maybe, she was also learning something about herself. Montepulciano stretched like a necklace of gemstones down the hillside, its medieval streets winding between reddish brick buildings that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Twilight painted the sky orange and pink, creating a magical atmosphere that contrasted with the small group's somber mood. The second Francesco Moretti lived in a villa near the city, a larger and more prosperous estate than the first. But when the housekeeper greeted them at the door, the news was discouraging. Signor Moretti had died 3 years earlier. He was a wonderful man, the woman said in Italian, which Gracie translated for Isabel. Married for 50 years to the same woman, father of 5 children. I never heard of an English woman in his life. Isabel received the news with a composure that broke Gracie's heart. He simply nodded politely and thanked her for the information. 2 down, Henry muttered as they got back into the car. We still have San Gimignano tomorrow, Gracie said quickly, trying to remain optimistic. And then what? And then what? Henry turned to her, his frustration finally boiling over. How many doors are we going to knock on? How much hope are we going to get before we admit this is an impossible quest? Henry, please, Isabel intervened, but her voice sounded tired for the first time. They dined at a small restaurant in Montepulciano's historic center. The food was delicious, but no one seemed to have any appetite. Isabel picked at her risotto absent-mindedly. Henry checked his phone every 5 minutes, and Gracie felt responsible for the tension that hung over the table like a cloud. Maybe Henry's right, Isabel said suddenly, putting down her fork. Maybe I'm just a silly old woman chasing ghosts. No, Gracie said more vehemently than she intended. You're not foolish, you're brave. You're doing something most people would never have the courage to do. I'm doing something I should have done 50 years ago, Isabel replied bitterly, when there was still time. There's always time, Gracie insisted. Always. Henry stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. You really believe that? Even after today? Especially after today. Gracie was surprised by her own conviction. One closed door doesn't mean all are closed. A Francesco who isn't the right one doesn't mean the right Francesco doesn't exist. What if he doesn't exist anymore? Henry asked softly. What if he died or moved away or just forgot? Isabel looked up at her grandson, and Gracie saw decades of love and understanding in that look. Henry, darling, I know you're trying to protect me. I know your father hurt you and your mother when they left. I know you've learned not to trust love because you've seen how cruel it can be. Henry stiffened. Grandma, but love was not cruel to me and Francesco. We were cruel to him. I was cruel. I was afraid and ran away, and I spent 50 years paying for that cowardice. She reached out and touched her grandson's face tenderly. If Francesco is dead, if he's forgotten me, if he doesn't want to see me, I still have to try. Because the only thing worse than finding out it's too late is never finding out at all. The restaurant around them was still bustling with laughter and conversation, but at their table, the silence was almost palpable. Gracie felt she was witnessing something intimate and profound, a conversation grandmother and grandson had needed to have for years. I just don't want you to get hurt, Henry said finally, his voice lower. I know, but I've been hurt for decades, love. This might be my chance to heal. They returned to their respective hotels in silence. Gracie said goodbye to Isabel and Henry in the lobby of Villa Francesca, promising to meet them the next morning for the trip to San Gimignano. Gracie, Isabel called after her as she walked away. Thank you for everything, for believing. Thank you, Gracie replied sincerely, for reminding me that it's worth believing. When he arrived at his hotel, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. Samuel was in his room, sitting on the bed with his laptop open, surrounded by papers and taking notes in his black notebook. "Where have you been?" he asked without looking up from the screen. Gracie sat in the chair by the window, watching him. How to explain the last 2 days? How to talk about Isabel, about the search, about the feeling of experiencing something important for the first time in a long time? "I was helping some friends," he said finally. "What friends?" "You don't know anyone here." "I met him. An elderly woman and her grandson. They're looking for someone." Samuel finally looked at her, frowning. "And what does this have to do with us? With our trip?" "Nothing," Gracie admitted. "And everything. What does this mean?" She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the ancient city below. "It means that sometimes we find purpose in the most unexpected places. Sometimes helping a stranger teaches us things about ourselves." "Gracie, you're speaking in riddles. We only have 3 more days here, and I need you to help me with the contacts I've made. There's a cheese importer in Florence who could be crucial to the restaurant." She turned to him, studying his familiar face. Samuel was handsome, intelligent, ambitious. But when was the last time he'd talked about anything other than the restaurant? When was the last time they'd had a conversation about dreams, about love, about what truly mattered in life? "What if I say I can't? That I promised to help Isabel find Francesco?" "Isabel? Francesco? Gracie, what are you talking about?" She told the whole story. The letter, the meeting with Isabel, the search for the Francesco Morettis, the disappointments of the day. Samuel listened with a look of growing disbelief. "You're kidding," he said when she finished. "You canceled our plans to pursue a romantic fantasy with a woman you don't even know?" "I didn't cancel our plans. Our plans were to spend time together, and you've been spending all your time working." "I'm working on our future." "In your future," she corrected gently. "In your restaurant's future. When was the last time you asked about my dreams, Samuel? About what I want?" He closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "Your dreams? Gracie, you work as a fact-checker for a magazine. It's a good, stable job. Our plan was always for me to open the restaurant, for us to get married, for us to build a solid life. Since when is that not enough? Since I realized it, I've never been asked if that's what I wanted." The silence stretched between them like an abyss. Gracie realized this conversation had been going on for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to explode. "I'm going to San Gimignano tomorrow," he said finally, "with Isabel and Henry. I promised I'd help them." "And me?" She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time she truly saw him. She saw the man who had fallen in love with her ambitions more than with her, who had stopped asking about her dreams because he was too busy pursuing his own. "You can come with us," he said, "or you can stay and work. The choice is yours." Samuel shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe you're doing this. For strangers." "It's not because of strangers, Samuel. It's because of me." He didn't answer, just reopened his laptop and went back to work. Gracie went to the bathroom, brushed her teeth and got ready for bed. But she knew she wouldn't make it. For the first time in years, she had stood up for something she believed in. She had chosen to help a brave woman searching for her true love, even knowing it would create problems with her fiancé. And the strangest thing of all, he had no regrets. San Gimignano loomed on the horizon like a city of medieval towers challenging the sky, their silhouettes silhouetted against the clear blue of the morning, creating a vision straight out of a fairy tale. Gracie stared out the car window, trying to focus on the beauty of the landscape instead of the tension that had lingered in the air since they'd left Montepulciano. Isabel was even quieter than the day before, and Henry drove with an almost fierce concentration, as if he could control the outcome of the journey through the precision of his maneuvers. Gracie checked her phone again. No message from Samuel. He had left the hotel early, leaving only a note saying he would be in Florence on business. "It's our last chance, isn't it?" Isabel asked suddenly, breaking the hour-long silence. Gracie turned to her. "Not necessarily. We still have other names on the list in other cities." "No." Isabel shook her head. "I feel like it's today or never. I can't explain it, but there's something about San Gimignano. Francesco always talked about this city. He said it was magical, that the ancient towers held secrets of love." Henry snorted softly but didn't make any sarcastic comments. Gracie noticed he was different today, less aggressive in his skepticism. Perhaps last night's conversation with Isabel had touched something in him. They parked in the lower part of town and walked up the cobblestone streets to the historic center. San Gimignano was smaller than Montepulciano, more concentrated, its medieval towers creating canyons of shadow and light that gave the town an air of mystery. The winery is on the outskirts. Gracie consulted her notes. Francesco Moretti, 76 years old, widowed for 2 years. Specializes in Vernaccia di San Gimignano. Widower, Isabel murmured, and Gracie couldn't decipher whether there was hope or guilt in her voice. They took a taxi to the winery, about 10 minutes from the city center. The property was modest but well kept, with a pale stone house surrounded by vineyards stretching across the gently rolling hills. A simple sign read, Moretti, Vernaccia dal 1952. 1952, Isabel read aloud. Francesco would have started the winery shortly before he met me. They walked slowly down the gravel path toward the house. Gracie could feel Isabel's tension increase with each step. Henry stayed close to his grandmother, but his face was tight with worry. An elderly man sat on the porch peeling peaches into a ceramic bowl. When he saw them approaching, he politely rose. He was tall and thin, with neatly combed white hair and dark brown eyes. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, and there was a natural elegance in his movements. Buongiorno, he said with a warm smile. Can I help you? Isabel stopped in the middle of the trail. Her hand flew to her chest, and Gracie heard a small gasp escape her lips. Francesco? He said in a voice that was almost a whisper. The elderly man frowned, studying her face intently. For a moment that seemed eternal, they stared at each other across the 53 years that had separated them from their last meeting. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes. Isabel. His voice was hoarse with shock. Isabel Fletcher? Tears began to stream down Isabel's face. Yes, he managed. It's me. Francesco dropped the bowl of peaches, which shattered on the porch floor, scattering fruit and broken ceramic. But he didn't even notice. His eyes were fixed on Isabel as if she were an apparition. My dear Isabel, he said, descending the porch steps with uncertain steps. My dear, how, after all these years? They met in the middle of the courtyard. Francesco raised his trembling hands to touch Isabel's face, as if he needed confirmation that she was real. You're back, he said simply. I'm back, she replied, covering his hands with hers. It took me 50 years, but I'm back. Gracie felt her own tears begin to fall. Beside her, Henry stood completely still, watching the scene with an expression that mixed shock and something that almost seemed reverent. Why did you leave? Francesco asked, his voice thick with decades of suppressed pain. I waited for you, Isabel. I waited so long. I was afraid, she whispered. I was afraid of not being strong enough, of not being good enough for you. I was afraid of disappointing my family, of failing far from home. I was a terrible coward. Francesco shook his head, tears now streaming freely down his wrinkled cheeks. You were so young. We were both so young. Forgive me, Isabel asked, and there was a childlike vulnerability in her voice that broke Gracie's heart. Francesco didn't respond with words. Instead, he gently pulled her into an embrace that seemed to contain all the unspoken words, all the lost years, all the love that had remained untouched by time. Gracie and Henry slipped away discreetly, giving them privacy. They sat on a stone bench beneath an ancient olive tree, watching the reunion from afar. My God, Henry murmured, running his hands through his hair. They really love each other. After all this time, they really love each other. Gracie glanced at him sideways. It was the first time I'd heard him admit that true love could exist. You look surprised. Henry was silent for a long moment, watching his grandmother and Francesco talk in low voices, still holding hands. My parents divorced when I was 16, he said finally. It was a war. Accusations, betrayals, vicious fights. My father left with his secretary. My mother became bitter and resentful. For years she told me that romantic love was a lie, that men were all the same, that I should never completely trust anyone. He paused, swallowing hard. And then my grandmother always talked about Francesco, about the great love she had lost. I thought they were idealized memories, you know? the mind romanticizing what had actually been just a youthful crush. But it wasn't, Gracie said softly. No, he agreed, looking at her for the first time. It wasn't. And now, seeing them together, it's as if 50 years hadn't passed at all. It's as if their love had been suspended in time, waiting for this moment. They sat in silence, watching Isabel and Francesco walk slowly toward the vineyards, chatting animatedly like old friends reuniting after a long separation. Thank you, Henry said suddenly. Why? For believing in her when I didn't. For making this happen when I could only see the ways it could go wrong. Gracie smiled. I think we all need someone who believes in our dreams even when we doubt them ourselves. Henry stared at her with an intensity that made her blush. And who believes in your dreams, Gracie? The question caught her off guard. She thought of Samuel, how he had dismissed her literary aspirations as fantasies. She thought of her co-workers, who saw her only as a competent fact-checker. She thought of herself, who had stopped believing she could be a writer. I used to believe, he said finally. But I think I stopped some time ago. Maybe it's time to start over. There was something about the way he said it, the gentleness in his voice, that made Gracie's heart race. She really looked at him for the first time. Not the skeptical, protective man she'd met 3 days earlier, but Henry. His green eyes, the way the corners of his mouth curved when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands. Maybe, she said softly. And it was in that moment, sitting under an olive tree in Tuscany, watching a 50-year-old love reunite, that Gracie realized something fundamental had shifted within her. It wasn't just Isabel's story that had touched her. It was the entire journey, the courage to pursue the impossible, the beauty of finding connection in the most unexpected places, including, perhaps, the man sitting next to her. Francesco's winery was a sanctuary of aromas and memories, with oak barrels lined against stone walls and bottles of Vernaccia carefully arranged on antique shelves. Isabel and Francesco had been missing for over an hour, strolling through the vineyards and catching up on 5 decades of life apart. Gracie and Henry waited on the porch, sipping a delicate white wine Francesco had insisted they try. The silence between them had changed. No longer the tension of the first few days, but something softer, almost contemplative. Tell me about yourself, Henry said suddenly, setting down his glass. I mean, besides the fact-checking and the fiancé who prefers truffles to romance, who is Gracie Foster really? She laughed, surprised by the direct question. That's a dangerous question. Why? Because no one has asked me that in a long time. Most people just want to know about my work or my wedding plans. Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Well, I'm not most people, and I have time. Gracie looked out over the rolling Tuscan hills, wondering where to begin. I used to write, she finally said. Stories, short stories. I started a novel once. I dreamed of being the next great American writer, you know. Very cliché, but it was real to me. What happened? Real life. Bills to pay, stability to seek. People telling me writing was a hobby, not a career. I got the job at the magazine, met Samuel, and somehow, I just stopped. Did you stop writing? Or did you stop dreaming? The question hit her like a gentle punch to the stomach. Both, I guess. Henry was silent for a moment, twirling the glass between his fingers. Do you know what's impressed me most about you these past few days? What? The way you wrote to Isabel. Sophia showed me the letter yesterday when we went back to Juliet's house to pick up some things. Your letter wasn't just kind. It was beautiful. Poetic, even. You have talent, Gracie. She stared at him, surprised. Did you read my letter? Isabel insisted. She said she wanted me to understand why she had decided to come to Italy. And I did. Anyone who could write something so moving. Well, they're not just a fact-checker, are they? Gracie felt her cheeks flush. It had been a long time since anyone had complimented her writing, so long that she had almost forgotten how good it felt to hear her words touch someone. Thank you, she said softly. Samuel Lua Carta? Samuel doesn't even know about the letter. Or Isabel, actually. Well, he does now, but... She sighed. It's complicated. He doesn't support your dreams. Gracie hesitated. How could she explain that Samuel didn't see her dreams as real? How could she admit that she'd stopped talking about them because he always found a way to minimize them? Samuel is practical, he said carefully. He believes in tangible goals, solid plans. Dreaming doesn't fit well into his world. And in your world? I don't know what my world is anymore. Henry stood and held out his hand to her. Come, I want to show you something. He led her away from the house, down a trail that wound through the vineyard-covered hills. The afternoon sun cast a warm gold glow on the vine leaves, and the air smelled of fertile earth and ripening grapes. Where are we going? She asked. You'll see. They walked for about 10 minutes before reaching a small promontory that offered a panoramic view of the valley. San Gimignano loomed in the distance, its medieval towers silhouetted against the sky, which was beginning to turn orange. It's beautiful, Gracie breathed. My grandma brought me here when I was a kid, Henry said, sitting on a flat rock. During summer vacation, she always said this place reminded her of Francesco, of how she felt when she was with him. Gracie sat beside him, aware of how close they were, how she could feel the heat from his body. Did you come to Italy as a child? Every summer until I was 12. Then my parents started fighting more and the trip stopped. But I always remembered this place. The way Isabel talked about love, about what it felt like to be truly in love. He turned to her, and Gracie saw a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Seeing her reunite with Francesco today, I realized I spent years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that true love was an illusion because it was safer not to believe than to risk disappointment. Gracie watched him silently, watching him struggle to find the right words. But when I saw her face as she recognized Francesco, when I saw 50 years disappear in a second, I realized that true love isn't an illusion. It's just rare and precious and worth fighting for. Gracie's heart began to beat faster. There was something in the way he looked at her, the intensity in his voice that made her feel like he wasn't just talking about Isabel and Francesco. Henry, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of her cell phone ringing. Samuel. The name flashed on the screen and Gracie felt a wave of guilt mixed with irritation. She had been so absorbed in her conversation with Henry that she had almost completely forgotten about her real life. Sorry, he muttered, answering the call. Samuel? Gracie, where the hell are you? His voice was tense, almost furious. I've been at the hotel for an hour waiting for you. We have an important dinner tonight with the wine distributor I met in Florence. I told you I'd be in San Gimignano today. I thought you were joking. I thought after our conversation yesterday you would have returned to normal, but apparently you're still chasing that ridiculous fantasy. Gracie glanced at Henry, who had discreetly moved away to give her privacy, but she could still hear Samuel's raised tone through the phone. It's not a fantasy, Samuel. Isabel found Francesco. They met again after 50 years. So what? What does this have to do with us, with our future? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Gracie, you're talking nonsense. Listen, cancel this nonsense and come back now. This dinner could be crucial for the restaurant. What if I say no? Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean no? I mean, maybe I don't want to rush back to a business dinner. Maybe I want to stay here and celebrate with a brave woman who finally found her true love. Gracie, you're being irrational. Come back now, or what, Samuel? Another silence. Longer this time. Or maybe we need to rethink our relationship. The words hung in the air like a threat. Gracie looked out at the golden Tuscan hills, at Henry watching respectfully from a distance, at the beauty of the world around her. And suddenly, she knew. Maybe we do, he said calmly. You're not serious. I've never been so serious in my life. Gracie, Samuel, when was the last time you asked about my dreams? When was the last time we talked about something other than the restaurant? When was the last time you actually saw me? I'm trying to build our life. You're building your life, I'm just a convenient accessory. Henry had returned to her, concern clear in his eyes. Gracie gave him a small, reassuring smile. I can't go on like this, Samuel. I can't go on being a lesser version of myself to fit into your vision of what our life should be. So what are you saying? Gracie took a deep breath, feeling a freedom that was both strange and terrifying at the same time. I'm saying I need some time to think about what I really want, about who I really am when I'm not trying to be what you need me to be. Gracie, don't be dramatic. Go back to the hotel and we can talk about this. No, Samuel. For once in my life, I will finish what I started. I will stay with Isabel and Francesco tonight. I will celebrate true love, and I will decide what to do with my own life." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking slightly. Henry immediately approached. "Are you well?" "I think so," she said, surprised to realize it was true. "In fact, I think I look better than I have in a long time. Want to talk about it?" Gracie looked at him, at his kind eyes, at the way he watched her with genuine interest and concern, at the way he had changed from skeptical protector to someone who seemed to genuinely care about her. "You know what's weird?" she said. "For years I tried to be Samuel's perfect girlfriend. I tried to fit my dreams into the space he left for them, and I never really felt seen or valued. And now after 3 days with you and Isabel, I feel like someone finally sees who I really am, and doesn't think I'm not enough." Henry took a step closer, and Gracie could see the small lines around his eyes, the shape of his mouth, the way he looked at her as if she were precious. "You are far from inadequate, Gracie Foster." The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky pink and gold. In the distance, they could see Isabel and Francesco walking hand in hand through the vineyards, two silhouettes that defied time and proved that true love could wait decades to be claimed. And there, on that promontory in Tuscany, Gracie felt something new blossom within her. Not just the courage to end a relationship that wasn't making her happy, but the possibility, both frightening and wonderful, that maybe, just maybe, true love wasn't just for other people. Maybe it was for her too. The table on Francesco's balcony was lit by candles that danced gently in the evening breeze. Handmade ceramic plates held a feast of Tuscan flavors: pappardelle with wild boar, bruschetta with fresh garden tomatoes, local cheeses accompanied by acacia honey. Bottles of Vernaccia and Chianti reflected the golden light, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. Isabel was radiant. Her cheeks flushed with wine and happiness. She looked decades younger. She wore a pale blue dress she'd brought especially for this trip, just in case she'd confessed to Gracie earlier, and her gray hair gleamed in the candlelight. Francesco couldn't take his eyes off her. Sitting beside her, he held her hand with the tenderness of a young man in love, occasionally raising it to his lips to kiss her fingers. He had changed from his work clothes to a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, and his eyes shone with a happiness that seemed to illuminate the entire table. "Tell us about your wife," Isabel said gently, showing a generosity that touched Gracie's heart. "She must have been a wonderful woman." Francesco smiled wistfully. "Elena was special. Kind, patient with me and my old vintner's moods. We married in 1965, 8 years later, after you left." He squeezed Isabel's hand a little tighter. "But you must know, dear Isabel, that even though I loved Elena, I never forgot you. Not even for a day. And she knew it. In her later years, when she was ill, she used to say to me, 'Francesco, if your Englishwoman ever returns, don't let pride or loyalty to my memory hinder your happiness.'" Isabel brought her free hand to her eyes, wiping away a tear. "She seems to have been a saint." "It was. And I would have loved you." Henry, who had been watching the interaction with an expression of growing admiration, leaned forward. "Grandma, tell Francesco about Grandpa." Isabel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thomas was a good man, Francesco. Very proper, very English. We married in 1959, and he never asked me any questions about my time in Italy. I think he knew there was something, but he chose not to investigate." She looked at Francesco with a mixture of guilt and affection. "We had a decent life. He gave me Henry Sr. He gave me stability. He was never cruel or neglectful. But I always felt like I was playing a role. The perfect wife, the devoted mother, the woman who never questioned, never dreamed too big. And now?" Francesco asked softly. "Now I feel like I can finally be myself again." Gracie watched all this with fascination, seeing how true love could not only survive time, but emerge even stronger, tempered by experience and gratitude. At the same time, she couldn't help but think about her own situation. The phone that kept ringing with calls from Samuel that she refused, the decision she had made that afternoon, the uncertainty of what came next. "Gracie," Francesco said, pulling her from her thoughts, "Isabel told me you have a special talent with words. Are you a writer?" I tried to be. It's complicated. In Italy, we believe that if something is in your heart, it's never too late to pursue it, Francesco said with a warm smile. Look at us too. Living proof that time doesn't kill true dreams, it only tests them. Henry turned to her. You should write about this trip. About Isabel and Francesco. About second chances, about you learning to believe in love again? Gracie suggested with a mischievous smile. He laughed, and the sound was freer than any laugh she'd heard from him before. Maybe especially about this. The conversation flowed into the evening, accompanied by more wine and stories of the 50 years Isabel and Francesco had spent apart. He told her about how he had built the winery alone, about the difficult years when the grapes were attacked by pests, about the joy when he finally managed to produce a Vernaccia that won regional awards. She talked about London, about raising a son alone after Thomas died young, about the small jobs she did to support herself, about how she had always held the memories of Tuscany close to her heart. You know what's funny? Isabel said when the night was well underway. All these years I used to dream of returning to Italy, but I always imagined it would be to say goodbye, to apologize, and to move on. I never imagined that we could start over. Francesco finished the sentence. Can we? She asked, and there was an almost childlike vulnerability in her voice. With all this age, all these lost years, can we really start over? Francesco stood and held out his hand to her. Can I show you something? He led her to a small table in the corner of the porch where an antique wooden box sat. He carefully opened it, revealing letters yellowed with age, faded photographs, and a small porcelain doll dressed in traditional English attire. This doll, he said, taking it gently. You gave me the last day we spent together. You said it was to remember you by. Isabel covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. I kept everything. Every letter you wrote me before you left. Every photograph we took together. Every little memento of our 3 months together. He looked at her with an intensity that made Gracie hold her breath. Isabel, darling, I never stopped loving you. Not for a day. Isabel threw herself into his arms, and they embraced as if trying to make up for 5 decades in a few minutes. Gracie felt tears streaming down her own face, touched by the raw beauty of that emotion. Henry stood discreetly and motioned for Gracie to follow him. They walked into the garden, giving the couple some privacy. It's beautiful, Gracie murmured, wiping her eyes. It's miraculous, Henry corrected. And you made it possible. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the garden lit only by the full moon. The night air smelled of lavender and rosemary, and in the distance they could hear the soft murmur of Isabel and Francesco talking on the porch. Gracie, Henry said suddenly, stopping beside a small fountain. Can I confess something? Of course. When I met you 3 days ago, I thought you were just another romantic American, full of fantasies about Italy and true love. He turned to her, and in the moonlight his eyes looked almost silver. I was completely wrong. And? You're not romantic in the naive sense of the word. You're brave. Brave enough to answer a 50-year-old letter. Brave enough to convince an elderly woman to pursue a dream. Brave enough to confront a skeptical man like me and make me question everything I believed about love. Gracie felt her heart race. Henry, and today when you stood up to your fiancé on the phone, when you chose to stay here instead of running back to do what was expected of you, it was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. He took a step closer and Gracie could feel the heat of his body, the subtle scent of his perfume mixed with the aroma of red wine. You made me believe again, Gracie. In love, in second chances, in miracles, and most importantly, he reached up to gently touch her face. You made me want to risk my own heart. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if he were asking permission. But when Gracie responded, deepening the contact, something exploded between them. Weeks of tension, days of mutual discovery, hours of conversation that had created an intimacy she'd never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, they were both panting. This is crazy, Gracie muttered. Absolutely, he agreed, smiling. But the best madness of my life. They returned to the balcony hand in hand to find Isabel and Francesco also embraced, gazing up at the stars. For a moment, the four remained silent, each couple lost in their own thoughts about love, time, and the surprising twists and turns life can take. You know, Isabel said finally, I think this was the happiest night of my life." Francesco kissed her forehead. "The first of many, Sparrow." And watching them, feeling Henry's hand intertwined with hers, Gracie had a feeling Isabel was right. Some nights are turning points in a person's life. Nights that divide before and after, that change everything forever. This was definitely one of those nights. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the linen curtains of the guest house where Gracie had spent the night. Francesco had insisted that she and Henry stay rather than make the long journey back in the dark, and Isabel had supported the idea with a smile that suggested she knew exactly what was going on between her new friend and her grandson. Gracie woke to the sound of voices coming from the kitchen and the aroma of fresh coffee. For a moment she lay there, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Isabel and Francesco's reunion, her decision to confront Samuel, her kiss with Henry. It seemed impossible that her entire life could change so drastically in such a short time. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Isabel in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the ease of someone who belonged there. She wore an apron that clearly belonged to Francesco's late wife and looked years younger in the morning light. "Good morning, dear," Isabel said with a radiant smile. "I hope you slept well." "Like a rock," Gracie lied. In truth, she'd been awake most of the night, replaying every conversation, every touch, every moment of the past few days. Francesco left early to check the vineyards, but he left fresh bread and homemade jam. "And Henry is on the porch if you want to join him." Gracie grabbed a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony, where she found Henry sitting at the wrought iron table, reading an Italian newspaper. He looked up when she appeared, and his smile made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning," he said, getting up to pull out a chair for her. "Good morning." She sat up, aware of his proximity, of how the morning light brought out the golden hues in his dark hair. "How are you feeling about yesterday?" It was a loaded question. Gracie knew he wasn't just asking about the kiss, but about the entire cascade of decisions she'd made. Scared, she admitted. Freed. Confused. All at the same time. Henry nodded, reaching out to cover her hand on the table. "It's normal. Big changes always come with mixed feelings. And you? How are you feeling about everything?" He hesitated, and for a moment she feared he was going to say it had been a mistake, that the wine and the romantic atmosphere had led them to do something reckless. "I feel like I'm waking up from a long sleep," he said finally. "Like I've spent years protecting myself from feeling anything real, and now I don't want to protect myself anymore." Gracie's phone rang, interrupting the moment. Samuel again. She glanced at the screen, then at Henry. "You have to answer it," he said softly. "You can't avoid it forever." Gracie sighed and answered, "Samuel." "Finally. Gracie, where did you spend the night?" "I've been trying to call. I stayed at Francesco's house. With Isabel and Henry." "In a stranger's house?" "Gracie, that's dangerous and irresponsible." She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar irritation rise. How could he make her feel like a scolded child? "They're not strangers, Samuel. They're friends. Friends you've known for 3 days. Listen, I've been up all night thinking. I know I might have been a little business-focused during this trip. I can try to balance things better. How about we head back to Verona today and try to salvage the last few days of our trip?" Gracie glanced at Henry, who pretended to read the newspaper but was clearly listening to the conversation. He gazed out over the balcony at the Tuscan hills, where Isabel and Francesco walked hand in hand through the vineyards. He thought of the woman she had been 3 days ago. Cautious, complacent, living a life that wasn't truly hers. "No," he said calmly. "No what? I'm not going back to Verona today. And I don't think we should try to salvage our trip, Samuel. I think we should admit that it perfectly reflects what our relationship has become." Silence on the other end. Then, "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that we've spent the last 2 years living parallel lives instead of one shared life. You pursue your culinary dreams and I forgot what my dreams were." "Gracie, you're being dramatic." "No, Samuel. For the first time in a long time, I'm being honest." Henry looked up from his newspaper, meeting her gaze. There was encouragement in his eyes, and something else. Admiration for what she was doing. "What do you want from me?" Samuel asked, and she could hear the growing frustration in his voice. "I want you to be happy," she said. surprised by her sincerity. "I want you to open your own restaurant, to be the incredible chef I know you can be. And I want you to find someone who shares that passion with you, who is genuinely interested in wine tastings and truffle suppliers. And you? What are you going to do?" Gracie looked back at Henry, then at the landscape stretching out before her. "I'm going to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be. I'm going to try writing again. I'm going to see if I can reclaim the dreams I've let go of." "This is about that man, isn't it? The grandson?" The question caught her off guard. "No," he said, and realized it was true. "This is about me, Samuel. About finally having the courage to admit that I deserve more than a relationship where I feel invisible." Another long silence. When Samuel spoke again, his voice was calmer, almost resigned. "So that's it? 3 years together and you're ending it all because of a week in Italy?" "I'm not breaking up because of a week in Italy. I'm breaking up because this week made me realize we haven't been happy in a long time. None of us." She heard Samuel sigh heavily. "What about the ring? The wedding plans? Leave the ring at the hotel. As for plans, I think we both know we were more excited about the idea of marriage than the wedding itself. Gracie, Samuel, you're a good man. You'll find someone who loves your ambition, who wants to build a life around your career, but that's not me. Not anymore." She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking slightly. Henry immediately stood up and came to her, pulling her into a gentle hug. "How was it?" he asked against her hair. "Scary, liberating, necessary. Do you regret it?" She pulled back to look him in the eyes. "No, and that surprises me more than anything else." Isabel appeared on the porch at that moment, carrying a tray of warm croissants and jam. She stopped when she saw the two of them embracing, a smile spreading across her face. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," he said with feigned innocence. "Actually," Gracie said, still in Henry's arms, "I think you're witnessing a new beginning." Isabel set down the tray and applauded softly. "Oh dear, how wonderful. Francesco will be so happy when he finds out." And so it was, on the porch of a house in Tuscany, surrounded by people she had met just 3 days before, but who already meant more to her than she had ever imagined possible, that Gracie finally allowed herself to believe that sometimes the best decisions in life are the ones that scare us the most. The next few days passed like a golden dream. Gracie had canceled her flight back to New York, extending her stay in Italy indefinitely, a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier, but now seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Francesco had insisted that everyone stay at his estate. "The house is too big for an old man alone," he said. "And Elena always said that a house without laughter is a dead house." And so Isabel settled into the master bedroom as if she had always belonged there, while Gracie and Henry occupied guest rooms upstairs. The dynamic between the four developed naturally. Isabel and Francesco spent mornings in the vineyards, he teaching her the techniques he had perfected over decades, she sharing gardening stories she had learned in England. There was a tenderness between them that was beautiful to observe, not the fiery passion of youth, but something deeper, tempered by experience and gratitude. Gracie found herself writing for the first time in years. She sat on the balcony every afternoon with her laptop, letting the words flow as she gazed out at the Tuscan landscape. It began as a travel journal, but gradually evolved into something more, a story about love, courage, and second chances. "Can I read it?" Henry asked one afternoon, finding her typing furiously under the shade of an olive tree. She hesitated. It had been a long time since she'd shown her writing to anyone, especially something so personal. "It's just a draft," he said. "Still very rough. Can I be the judge of that?" She turned the laptop toward him, watching nervously as he read the first few pages. His eyes flicked across the lines, and she tried to read his expression. "Gracie," he said finally, looking up, "that's extraordinary. Don't be nice just because." "I'm not being nice. I'm being honest." He leaned forward, the familiar intensity shining in his eyes. "You have a real, authentic voice. The way you describe Isabel's feelings, her emotional journey, it's powerful." Gracie felt a wave of pleasure she had almost forgotten existed. "You really think so? I think you should think about turning this into a real book. Publishing it." The idea was so big, so daunting that she almost laughed. Henry, I'm a fact-checker. I'm not a writer. You are what you choose to be, he said, echoing the words she had said to Isabel days earlier. And from what I see here, you chose to be a writer. That night during dinner on the veranda, a tradition they had established, Francesco made an announcement that surprised everyone. Isabel and I have been talking, he said, holding her hand across the table, and we've decided we're not going to waste any more time. What do you mean? Gracie asked. Isabel smiled, her eyes shining with an almost youthful joy. We want to tell you that we're getting married. Here in Tuscany, surrounded by the people we love. Henry nearly dropped his wine glass. Grandma, are you sure? I mean, it all happened so fast. Henry, dear, Isabel laughed. When you're 73, a quick is relative. Francesco and I have already lost 50 years. We have no intention of losing another day. Francesco nodded, raising his glass. At my age, every day is a gift. I want to spend every one of my remaining days with the woman I've always loved. Gracie felt tears burn her eyes. When? Next Saturday, Isabel said. Francesco knows a priest in town who can marry us in a small ceremony. Nothing fancy, just intimate. And then? Henry asked, still trying to process the news. Then Isabel will live here with me, Francesco said simply. We'll tend the vineyards together, travel whenever we want, and enjoy every sunset we're given. The simplicity and beauty of the plan left them speechless for a moment. Then Henry stood up, walked over to his grandmother, and kissed her on the forehead. If that's what makes you happy, Grandma, then it makes me happy too. And you? Isabel asked, looking between Henry and Gracie. Are you staying for the wedding? Gracie looked at Henry, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Good, Francesco said, smiling. Because I have another surprise. He got up and disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a dusty bottle of wine. This is a 1957 Brunello, the year we met. I've kept it all these years, waiting for a special occasion. He carefully opened the bottle and poured 4 glasses of the wine that had aged along with his love for Isabel. A toast, he said, raising his glass. To the love that waits, to second chances, and to the people brave enough to believe it's never too late to start over. They drank the wine in reverent silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the transformative power of time and true love. Later that night, Gracie and Henry walked through the vineyards under a starry sky. The full moon bathed the vines in silver, creating a scene that seemed made of magic. Can I confess something? Henry said, stopping beside a row of nearly ripe grapes. Always. When I was a child and I came to visit my grandmother, she used to tell me stories about Italy, about Francesco. I loved them, but as I grew up, I began to think of them as fairy tales. Beautiful, but not real. He turned to her, and in the moonlight his eyes seemed deep as the ocean. Now I realize they weren't fairy tales. They were memories of real love, preserved perfectly in her heart all these years. And did that change anything for you? Gracie asked softly. It changed everything. It changed the way I see love, relationships, the possibility of real connections between people. He took a step closer, and it made me realize that when you find something true, something that touches your soul, you shouldn't let it slip away out of fear or cynicism. Gracie felt her heart race. Henry, I know we've only known each other for a week. I know you just got out of a long-term relationship. I know this all happened so fast. He lifted his hands to gently cup her face. But I also know I've never felt anything like what I feel when I'm with you. What do you feel? She whispered. I feel like I've finally found the person with whom I want to share every sunset, every morning, every little discovery in life. He smiled, and there was a beautiful vulnerability in his expression. I feel like I've found my home in you, Gracie. The kiss this time was different from the first, not hesitant or exploratory, but confident, full of promise. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. This is insane, Gracie said, echoing her words from the night before. Absolutely, he agreed. But look at Isabel and Francesco. Sometimes insanity is exactly what we need. They walked back into the house hand in hand, finding Isabel in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when she saw them enter, a knowing smile playing on her lips. How was the tour? Enlightening, Henry replied, squeezing Gracie's hand. Isabel nodded in satisfaction. Good. Because I have a question to ask. She turned to Gracie. Honey, I know this may sound presumptuous, but would you like to be my maid of honor? Gracie felt immediate tears burn her eyes. Isabel, it would be an honor. And Henry, Isabel continued, would you like me to walk you down the aisle? I know you're not your grandfather, but Henry hugged his grandmother tightly. It would be the greatest privilege of my life, Grandma. And so it was, in the cozy kitchen of a Tuscan home, that plans for the most romantic wedding Gracie had ever witnessed began to take shape. It wouldn't be a large or elaborate ceremony, but it would be perfect. A celebration of true love, second chances, and the courage to believe that it's never too late to be happy. When they finally went to their rooms, Gracie stopped at the door to hers, looking at Henry. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For helping me rediscover who I am, for believing in my dreams when I didn't believe in myself, for showing me what it's like to be truly seen and valued. Henry leaned in and kissed her forehead tenderly. Thank you for showing me that true love is worth any risk. They parted to go to their respective rooms, but Gracie knew something had irrevocably changed between them. It was no longer a question of whether there was a future for them, but what kind of future they would build together. Lying in bed, gazing out the window at the Tuscan stars, Gracie smiled as she realized her life had completely transformed in just 1 week. She had arrived in Italy as an engaged fact-checker, living a life that wasn't truly hers. Now she was a budding writer, free to pursue her dreams, in love with a man who saw her exactly as she was. And in a few days she would be a bridesmaid at the most romantic wedding in the world. Sometimes, he thought before falling asleep, the best adventures begin when we have the courage to reply to a letter forgotten in time. Saturday dawned with a cloudless blue sky and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of lavender and rosemary through the vineyards. Gracie woke early, her heart racing with anticipation of what looked like a perfect wedding day. The house had been abuzz with activity since sunrise. Francesco had hired a small team of local florists who transformed the porch and garden into a fairy tale setting, with arrangements of white roses, blue hydrangeas, and olive branches. A small white tent was erected on the lawn, under which Father Antonio, a kindly-faced elderly man who had known Francesco since childhood, would perform the ceremony. Gracie found Isabel in the master bedroom, sitting at an antique vanity, brushing her gray hair with slow, contemplative strokes. She wore a pink silk robe, and there was a radiant serenity on her face. "How are you feeling?" Gracie asked, sitting on the bed behind her. "Like a bride," Isabel replied with a smile. "At 73, I thought I'd never feel like this again. With these butterflies in my stomach, this mixture of nervousness and pure joy. And you have no doubts?" Isabel turned to her, her eyes shining. "None. I've spent 50 years doubting the decision I made in 1957. I won't waste another minute doubting the decision I'm making now." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. It was Henry, dressed in an impeccable navy suit, carrying a gift box wrapped in gold paper. "May I come in? I brought something for the bride." Isabel beckoned him closer. He opened the box, revealing a delicate vintage pearl necklace. "It belonged to my maternal grandmother," he explained. "To my mother's mother. She always said it should be worn by a truly loving bride." He smiled at Isabel fondly. "I think I finally found the right person to wear it." Isabel touched the pearls with trembling fingers. "Henry, dear, they're beautiful. But shouldn't you save them for when you get married?" Henry glanced briefly at Gracie, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. "Who knows? I might need them back soon." Gracie felt her heart skip a beat, but she pretended not to have heard the insinuation. The next few hours passed in a sweet rush of final preparations. Gracie helped Isabel into the outfit they'd chosen together in town 2 days earlier. A pale blue silk knee-length gown, elegant but not overly formal, perfect for a mature bride. The pearl necklace completed the look perfectly. When Isabel was ready, they went downstairs together to find Francesco waiting on the porch. He wore his best suit, a dark gray ensemble that set off his white hair and brown eyes. When he saw Isabel, his face lit up with palpable joy. "My beautiful bride," he murmured, kissing her hand. The guests were few but special. Sophia from Juliet's secretaries had come from Verona, bringing with her 2 other volunteers who had been captivated by Isabel's story. Francesco's son, whom Gracie had met on her first day in Montalcino, was present with his wife and 2 young children. Some neighbors and longtime friends of Francesco's completed the small celebratory group. The ceremony began at 4 in the afternoon, when the golden sun cast a perfect light over the vineyards. Father Antonio took his place under the white tent, his face radiating the joy of someone who had witnessed thousands of weddings, but had rarely seen such true love. Henry offered Isabel his arm, and together they walked slowly along the carpet of rose petals that led to the tent. Francesco was waiting for them, his eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" Father Antonio asked in Italian. "I," Henry replied, "on behalf of all who love her and wish her happiness." He kissed Isabel's cheek and handed her to Francesco. "Take good care of her," he whispered. "With my life," Francesco replied solemnly. The ceremony was simple, but deeply moving. When it came time to say their vows, Isabel and Francesco had chosen to write their own words. "Francesco," Isabel said, her voice firm despite her tears, "you were my first true love, and now I've discovered you're also my last. I promise not to waste another day of what we have left together. I promise to love you not just for the memory of what we were, but for the miracle of what we are now." Francesco held her hands, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Isabel, you carried my heart for 50 years without me knowing it. Now I promise to carry yours until my last breath. I promise that every day we spend together will be a celebration of the love that has survived time, distance, and fear." When the priest pronounced them man and wife, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. The kiss was gentle, reverent, filled with decades of longing finally satisfied. The party that followed was intimate and joyful. Tables were set out in the garden, laden with Tuscan specialties prepared by Francesco and his neighbors. The vernaccia flowed generously, accompanied by stories, laughter, and heartfelt toasts. As the sun began to set, Isabel and Francesco opened the dance with a slow waltz, moving with the grace of 2 young lovers. Gradually, other couples joined them. Henry extended his hand to Gracie and she let herself be swept into his strong arms. "What do you think it will be like in 50 years?" Henry asked as they danced. "When we are old and gray like them? Are you assuming we'll still be together 50 years from now?" Gracie teased, but there was real hope in her voice. "I'm guessing some love stories are too strong for time to destroy," he replied, pulling her closer. "And I have a good feeling about ours." Later, as the party drew to a close, Gracie found herself alone on the balcony with Isabel, who was still wearing her wedding dress and seemed aglow with happiness. "Thank you," Isabel said suddenly. "For what?" "For answering my letter. For believing it was worth trying. For making this day possible." She took Gracie's hands. "You changed my life, darling. You gave me back not only Francesco, but myself." Gracie felt tears burn her eyes. "You changed mine too. You showed me that it's never too late to be brave, to go after what we truly want. And what do you want now?" Gracie looked out across the balcony, where Henry was chatting with Francesco and some guests, his laughter carrying on the night breeze. She thought about the manuscript growing on her laptop, the possibilities opening up before her, the feeling of finally living her own life. "I want to keep writing. I want to see where this story takes us," she said, knowing she was referring to both the book and her relationship with Henry. "I want to be brave like you." Isabel smiled, squeezing her hands. "Then you already have everything you need, dear. The rest is just a matter of time." When the party finally ended and the guests said their goodbyes, the 4 sat on the balcony one last time, Isabel and Francesco as husband and wife, Gracie and Henry holding hands, all watching the Tuscan stars in contemplative silence. "You know," Francesco said, breaking the silence, "I don't think this house has seen so much happiness in decades." "It's funny," Gracie added, "how a 50-year-old letter could change so many lives." "It wasn't the letter," Isabel said softly. "It was the courage to respond to it, the courage to believe that true love deserves a second chance." Henry shook Gracie's hand. "Or a first chance." And there, under the starry Tuscan sky, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the distant murmur of vineyards, Gracie knew she had found not just a story to write, but a life to live. A life filled with love, courage, and the infinite magic of second chances. 3 weeks after the wedding, Gracie sat at the small porch table that had become her makeshift office, typing furiously on her laptop. The manuscript had grown to over 100 pages, and she felt a creative energy she hadn't experienced in years. "How's it going?" Henry asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Better than I imagined," she replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "It's strange, for years I thought I needed the city, the fast pace, the constant pressure to be creative. But here, the words just flow." Henry sat beside her, looking over her shoulder at the screen. "May I?" She turned the laptop so he could read the last chapter she'd written, a scene about Isabel and Francesco's reunion from her perspective, exploring the complex emotions of revisiting a love after 5 decades. "Gracie," he said after a few minutes, "this isn't just good, this is extraordinary. You're capturing something real here, something important about love, timing, courage. Do you really think so? I think you have a bestseller on your hands." They were interrupted by the arrival of Isabel, who was walking up the garden path carrying a basket of cut flowers. Over the past few weeks, she had settled into winery life as if she had always belonged there. She woke early to help Francesco with the vineyards, tended the garden in the afternoons, and cooked delicious dinners every night. "Good morning, my dears," he said cheerfully. "Francesco wants to know if you'd like to help with the harvest today. The grapes are ripe." "Sure," Gracie replied, saving the trouble. Harvesting had become a daily tradition for all of them, work that didn't feel like work when done in good company. They spent the morning in the vineyards cutting bunches of ripe grapes under the warm Tuscan sun. Francesco was a patient teacher, explaining how to identify the perfect point of ripeness, how to cut branches without damaging the plant. Isabel worked beside him with a natural grace, as if she had been doing this her whole life. "Are you thinking about staying?" Francesco asked Gracie during a water break. The question caught her off guard. In recent weeks, she had been so absorbed in writing and developing her relationship with Henry that she hadn't given serious thought to the practical future. I don't know," he admitted. "I have a job in New York, an apartment." "I did," Henry corrected gently. "You resigned by email last week, remember?" It was true. In a moment of courage inspired by the manuscript's progress, I had written a respectful but firm resignation letter, explaining that I had decided to pursue writing opportunities full-time. "What about the apartment?" Isabel asked. "It's rented. I can terminate the contract with 60 days' notice." "Then there's nothing really keeping you there," Francesco observed with a smile. "Except custom." Gracie looked around, at the golden vineyards, at the stone house that had become home, at Isabel radiating happiness, at Henry watching her with barely concealed hope. "Are you suggesting I move to Italy?" "We're suggesting," Isabel said carefully, "that you consider where you feel most at home, where your creativity flourishes, where your heart is happiest." That afternoon, Gracie received an unexpected call. It was Sandra Morrison, an editor at a major New York publishing house. "Miss Foster, I received your manuscript through our online submissions box. I don't normally read unsolicited submissions, but something about your pitch caught my eye." Gracie nearly dropped the phone. She had sent the first chapters to several publishers a week earlier, more on impulse than actual expectation. "I thank you for reading," she managed to say. "It's a beautiful story. Romantic, but with real substance. The concept of Juliet's secretaries is fascinating, and its protagonist has an authentic voice. I'd like to discuss the possibility of publishing it." Gracie's heart raced. "Really? Very seriously? Obviously, we'd need to see the full manuscript, but based on what I've read, I believe we have something special here. Could you come to New York next week to discuss the details?" Gracie glanced out the window at Henry, who was helping Francesco carry crates of grapes. "Actually," she heard herself say, "would it be possible for us to do this via video conference? I'm in Italy right now, finishing the book." "Of course, how romantic, writing a book about love in Italy. That'll be great for marketing." When she hung up the phone, Gracie felt dizzy. A real publisher was interested in her book. Her book. What had started as an impulse had become a real career possibility. Henry found her on the porch a few hours later, still processing the news. "How was the call?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "Unreal. She wants to publish the book, Henry. A real publisher in New York." That's amazing. He pulled her into a tight hug. I'm so proud of you. But that means I might have to go back to New York, for meetings, for promotion. Henry pulled back to look her in the eyes. And would that be a problem? It would be if it meant leaving this. She gestured between them, then to the house, to the entire life they had built in the last few weeks. Gracie, he said softly, do you think I would let a career opportunity or a few meetings separate me from you, especially after seeing what 50 years of separation did to Isabel and Francesco? What are you saying? I'm saying New York isn't the end of the world. I'm saying there are daily flights between here and there. I'm saying if you need to spend some time in the States for your career, we can make it work. He hesitated for a moment, then took her hands. Actually, there's something I've been wanting to ask you for days. Gracie's heart began to beat faster. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity she recognized. What is it? Henry stood up and, to her utter surprise, knelt before her. From his pocket, he took out a small velvet box. Gracie Foster, I know we've only known each other for a month. I know this all happened so fast, but I also know, with absolute certainty, that I want to spend the rest of my life proving that true love doesn't have to wait 50 years to be claimed. He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring, a delicate emerald surrounded by small diamonds. Will you marry me? Will you build a life together wherever that life takes us? Gracie looked at him, at the man who had started as a protective skeptic and become her biggest supporter, who believed in her dreams when she doubted herself, who had shown her what it was like to be loved completely. Yes, she said, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Yes, yes, yes. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When Henry stood to kiss her, Gracie heard applause from the house. Isabel and Francesco stood in the kitchen doorway watching the scene with radiant joy. Finally, Isabel cried. I thought they'd never make up their minds. That night they celebrated with a special bottle of Brunello that Francesco had saved for special occasions. Sitting on the balcony under the stars, they toasted to the future, uncertain in its details, but certain in their love. So, Francesco said, raising his glass, 2 weddings in 1 month. This house has truly become a sanctuary of love. For second chances, Isabel added. For first chances, Henry corrected, looking at Gracie. For every chance we have the courage to embrace, Gracie concluded. And as they sipped their wine and watched the full moon bathe the vineyards in silver, Gracie knew she had found not just a story to tell, but a life to live. A life where true love was not only possible, but inevitable for those brave enough to believe in it. A year later, Gracie was again at Juliet's house in Verona, but this time not as a tourist. She wore a simple white wedding dress, without a veil or any other adornments, and held a bouquet of lavender picked from Francesco's garden. Beside her, Henry waited nervously in a navy blue suit that highlighted his green eyes. The famous balcony had been transformed into a makeshift altar, decorated with arrangements of white roses and olive branches. Sophia and the other secretaries of Juliet had insisted on holding the wedding there, saying it was fitting that the story that began with a letter found there would be celebrated in the same location. Nervous? Henry asked, squeezing her hand. Oddly enough, no, Gracie replied, smiling. I feel like this is the natural conclusion to everything that started here. Isabel approached, beautiful in a pale blue dress, wearing the pearl necklace Henry had given her for her wedding to Francesco. In her hands, she carried something familiar, an envelope yellowed with age. I brought your original letter, Gracie said. I thought you might like to carry it today. As a symbol of how a single courageous decision can change everything, Gracie picked up the letter carefully, remembering the day she had found it among the ancient stones. It seemed like an eternity ago, even though it had only been a year. Thank you for everything. Thank you, dear. You gave me back my life. The ceremony was small and intimate. In addition to Isabel and Francesco, Sophia and Juliet's secretaries were present, as were some friends Gracie had made in the American expat community in Florence, and Henry's family, who had flown in from England for the occasion. Gracie's book, Letters to Juliet, A Story of Second Chances, had been published 6 months earlier and became an unexpected success. Sales had exceeded all expectations, and she had received hundreds of letters from readers sharing their own stories of love and courage. When it came time for the vows, Gracie had chosen simple but profound words. Henry, you taught me that true love is not something we find by chance, but something we build with daily choices of courage, kindness, and faith. I promise to make these choices every day for the rest of our lives together, Henry replied, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Gracie, you've shown me that sometimes the best adventures begin when we have the courage to help a stranger. I promise to be brave enough for this adventure we're starting together, wherever it takes us. When they were declared husband and wife, the kiss was accompanied by applause and tears of joy. A shower of rose petals fell upon them, thrown by the celebratory guests. The party was held in the garden of the villa Gracie and Henry had rented in Florence. Their base while she wrote, and he established a European office for his consulting firm. The head table was decorated with love letters from different eras, a nod to the tradition of Juliet's secretaries that had made it all possible. During dinner, Sophia stood up to make a special toast. In the tradition of Juliet's secretaries, we believe that every love letter we answer plants a seed of hope in the world, but we rarely get the chance to see those seeds grow into real stories. Gracie and Henry, you are living proof that true love exists, that it is worth fighting for, and that it is never too late, or too early, to be brave. As the sun set over Verona, Gracie and Henry retired to the famous balcony, alone for a moment amid the celebration. The city stretched out below them, illuminated by thousands of golden lights. So, Mrs. Fletcher, Henry said, using her new name, how did you find your first day as a married woman? Perfect, she replied, leaning against the balcony railing. Though it's still strange to think about how everything has changed. A year ago, I was an unhappy fact-checker, engaged to a man who barely saw me. Now I'm a writer married to his best friend. Best friend? Henry arched an eyebrow in mock offense. Best friend, greatest love, life partner, she corrected, smiling. All of those things. He pulled her closer, and they sat in silence for a moment, watching the lights of the city where it had all begun. You know what impresses me the most? Gracie said eventually. What? How could a 50-year-old letter create so many new connections? Isabel and Francesco, you and I, even Samuel. Samuel? Gracie smiled. I got a letter from him last month. He opened the restaurant in New York and is engaged to a chef he met during the renovations. He said our separation was the best thing that could have happened to both of us. And you agree? Absolutely. Sometimes we need to have the courage to end a story to allow the right ones to begin. Henry turned to her, cupping her face gently in his hands. And are you happy with the story we've started? I'm happy with every page, she replied. And I can't wait to see how it continues. They were interrupted by the arrival of Isabel and Francesco, who came up to the balcony carrying a bottle of champagne and 4 glasses. Sorry to interrupt, Isabel said with a mischievous smile, but I thought we should have a private toast, just the 4 of us. Francesco poured the champagne, a special vintage he had been saving since the year he first met Isabel. What shall we toast to? Henry asked. To the letters we answer, Isabel said, raising her glass. To the chances we embrace, Francesco added. To the love that waits, Henry continued. And to the love that never gives up, Gracie concluded. They drank in reverent silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the extraordinary turns life can take. You know, Gracie said after a few minutes, I've been thinking about writing another book. About what? Isabel asked with interest. About all the other letters we found in Juliet's house. About other love stories that deserve to be told. Other second chances that deserve a chance. Henry smiled. A whole series about the power of love letters? Exactly. Because after everything we've been through, I know our story isn't unique. There are thousands of people out there who just need a little courage to fight for their own happy endings. What a lovely idea, Francesco said. And you know what? I've been thinking about restoring the east wing of the house. It could be turned into a small writer's retreat. You could use it as a base to research these stories. Isabel clapped her hands in joy. Oh, how wonderful. We could have a place where people come to write about love, to find inspiration, to answer letters forgotten in time, Henry added, looking at Gracie with that smile that still made her heart race. Gracie looked around. At Isabel, who radiated happiness beside the man she had loved for more than 5 decades. At Francesco, whose eyes shone with the gratitude of someone whose great love had been returned. At Henry, who had learned to believe in love through her courage and was now her partner in all of life's adventures. "Then it's decided," he said, raising his glass again. "Let's create a sanctuary for love stories. A place where people can come and discover that it's never too late to be brave." "To be brave," the other three repeated in unison. As the night wore on and the party continued in the garden below, the four remained on the balcony, dreaming dreams and sharing stories. The full moon bathed Verona in silver, and the night air carried the scent of flowers and the promise of new beginnings. Gracie held Isabel's original letter to her chest, feeling the symbolic weight of those words written so long ago. A letter that had called for courage had created not just one, but multiple love stories. It had reunited a woman with her destiny, taught a skeptical man to believe, given a frustrated writer her true calling, and created a chosen family united by love and faith in second chances. When they finally descended to join the guests, Gracie knew this was just the beginning. There would be other books to write, other letters to find, other love stories to help blossom. But most importantly, there would be a lifetime of adventures with Henry, surrounded by people who believed in the transformative power of true love. And so, in the city where Romeo and Juliet had lived their impossible love, a new, possible love story was just beginning. A story that proved that sometimes the happiest endings come when we have the courage to respond to letters forgotten in time, to believe in second chances, and to never give up on the infinite magic of the human heart. The stars of Tuscany shone approvingly upon the four, and the gentle wind carried whispers of all the love stories still waiting to be discovered, all the letters still awaiting answers, all the hearts that still needed to find the courage to love completely. And Gracie knew, with the certainty that only comes when we find our true place in the world, that her greatest adventure was just beginning.